Jake Morrison sat in the large chair at the front of the council room. The chair was made of crystal that seemed to glow with its own light. Around him, hundreds of beings from different worlds filled the massive space. Some looked like giant insects. Others were made of pure energy that floated in the air. A few looked like walking trees with branches for arms. The room itself was amazing. It was a huge dome made of clear crystal that floated in empty space between the stars. Through the walls, Jake could see distant galaxies spinning slowly in the darkness. The Galactic Council had built this place to be neutral ground where no single world had an advantage. Jake adjusted his simple blue uniform and looked out at the crowd. Today was orientation day for new member species. Beings who had just joined the galactic community came here to learn how things worked. Most of them seemed confused about one thing in particular. A young creature from the Zeltharian system raised one of its 6 tentacles. Its skin was purple and covered in small spots that changed color when it talked. "Ambassador Morrison," it said in a voice that sounded like music, "I am HFY and I speak for my people. We have a question that many new species ask." Jake nodded. "Go ahead, HFY. That's what these meetings are for. Why do humans hold the head seat of the council?" HFY's spots turned bright orange, which Jake knew meant the creature was genuinely curious. "Your species has only been part of our community for 50 years. Many of us have been here for thousands of years. The cosmic observers have existed since before most stars were born, yet you sit in the chair of highest honor." A low murmur went through the crowd. Jake could see that this question had been on many minds. Some of the older species looked annoyed. Others seemed interested in his answer. The insect-like hive collective clicked their mandibles in what might have been agreement or disapproval. Amy Foster, Jake's aide, leaned forward from her seat behind him. She was young, maybe 30, with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. "Sir, should I prepare the standard explanation about human contributions to galactic defense?" Jake shook his head. "No, Amy. I think it's time they heard the real story." He stood up from the crystal chair and walked to the center of the room. The noise died down as everyone focused on him. Jake was not a tall man and he was getting gray around the edges, but when he spoke, people listened. "HFY asks a fair question," Jake said. "Why should humans who are new to all this sit in the most important chair in the galaxy?" "The answer isn't what most of you probably think." A being made of living rock from the granite world spoke up. Its voice sounded like grinding stone. "We have heard stories of human military victories. Do you claim leadership through conquest?" "No," Jake said firmly. "We didn't conquer anyone to get this seat. We didn't demand it or steal it. In fact, most humans didn't even want it." This caused more murmuring. The energy beings called Luminar pulsed with different colors as they communicated among themselves. The tree-like arboreals swayed slightly, which was how they showed interest. "Then how?" asked a representative of the aquatic depth dwellers. Its voice came through a water-filled helmet that let it breathe in the air-filled chamber. Jake looked around the room at all the different faces and forms. "To understand why humans sit here, you need to know what happened 50 years ago. You need to know about the day we broke every rule of galactic civilization." He paused and let that sink in. Several species shifted uncomfortably. Breaking galactic rules was serious business. "You need to know about the day we faced the Devourer fleet," Jake continued. The room went completely silent. Even the constant humming of the station's systems seemed to quiet down. Every being in the chamber knew about the Devourers. They were the nightmare that had haunted the galaxy for generations. An elderly representative of the silicon-based Crystarchs spoke in a voice like breaking glass. "The Devourers were destroyed decades ago. Everyone knows this." "Yes, they were destroyed," Jake agreed. "But what everyone doesn't know is how close we came to losing everything. What everyone doesn't know is why the Council decided that humans should lead." Amy leaned forward again. She had heard parts of this story before, but never the complete version. Her own mother had been there during those dark days. Jake walked slowly around the center of the room as he talked. 50 years ago, humanity had just learned that we were not alone in the universe. We had built our first faster-than-light ships. We were excited to meet other species and join the galactic community. He stopped and looked directly at HFY. But the first message we received from the Galactic Council wasn't a welcome. It was a warning. The Zeltharian spots turned deep blue, which meant fear. "What kind of warning?" "The kind that told us we were all going to die," Jake said simply. "The Devourer fleet was coming to our sector. They had already consumed 17 different civilizations. Billions of beings had died or fled their homes. The fleet was 3 days away from Earth. A representative of the ethereal collective, beings that looked like glowing fog drifted closer. But surely the Council offered humanity the same choice they offered everyone else. They did, Jake nodded. Evacuation. The Council had refugee ships ready to take our entire population to safe worlds far from the Devourer's path. All we had to do was abandon our home system and start over somewhere else. That is the wise choice, said the being made of living rock. Every species that survived the Devourers chose evacuation. It is the only logical response. Jake smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. That's what everyone thought. That's what made humans different. He returned to his chair but didn't sit down. Instead, he placed his hands on its crystal surface. This chair isn't a throne. It's not a reward for being the strongest or the smartest or the oldest. This chair exists because sometimes someone has to make the choice that everyone else thinks is impossible. The room waited. Even the youngest creatures could sense that something important was being said. 50 years ago, Jake said quietly, when every logical species in the galaxy would have run from the Devourers, humanity did something that shocked everyone. We decided to fight. The silence that followed was complete. In that silence, Jake could see the disbelief on faces across the room. Fighting the Devourers wasn't just dangerous, it was considered suicide. Tomorrow, Jake said, I'll tell you exactly what that fight cost us, and why it earned us this seat that so many of us wish we didn't have to fill. Captain Nick Sullivan stood on the bridge of the starship Endeavor, staring at the message that had changed everything. The ship was humanity's newest exploration vessel, built to carry them to the stars. Instead, it might become their tomb. Read it again, Lisa, Nick said to the woman sitting at the science station. Dr. Lisa Carter adjusted her glasses and looked at the screen. She was one of Earth's best scientists, but even she could barely believe what they had received. Message begins, greetings to the species of Sol 3. We are the Galactic Council. Your world lies in the direct path of a devourer fleet. You have 72 hours before they arrive. Evacuation ships are being prepared. Respond immediately with your population count for refugee allocation. Message ends. Nick ran his hand through his dark hair. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly, but he could feel their fear. Through the main window, Earth looked peaceful and blue. It was hard to believe that death was racing toward them through space. Captain, said Commander Pete Johnson from the engineering station. Pete was a big man with gentle eyes who could fix anything. Right now, he looked lost. The long-range sensors are picking up something massive coming from the outer system. It's bigger than anything we've ever seen. How big? Nick asked. Bigger than our entire moon, sir. And there are dozens of them. Lisa pulled up more data on her screen. Nick, I've been analyzing the Council's database they sent with the message. The Devourers are machines, but they're alive somehow. They eat entire planets, absorbing all the metal and energy. Every civilization they've encountered has either fled or been completely destroyed. The communication system crackled to life. Endeavor, this is Earth Control. President Rodriguez wants to speak with all ship commanders immediately. Nick nodded to his communications officer. Put her through. President Helen Rodriguez appeared on the main screen. She was a small woman with silver hair, but her voice was strong. Behind her, Nick could see the chaos of the emergency command center. People were running back and forth, and warning lights flashed red. Captain Sullivan, the president said, I'm speaking to all our ship commanders at once. We have a decision to make, and we have to make it fast. Other screens appeared showing the captains of humanity's small fleet. There were only 20 ships total, and most of them were exploration vessels like the Endeavor. Not exactly a military force, ma'am, said Captain Roy Mitchell from the research ship Discovery. What are our options? The Galactic Council is offering to evacuate our entire population, President Rodriguez said. They have ships that can carry 8 billion people to safety. We would be scattered across different worlds, but we would live. General Alex Thompson stepped into view behind the president. He was an older man with white hair and many medals on his uniform. The alternative is to stay and fight. But I have to tell you all, according to the Council's data, no species has ever successfully fought the Devourers. Everyone who tried was wiped out completely. Nick looked around his bridge. His crew was listening to every word. These were good people, scientists, engineers, explorers. They had signed up to discover new worlds, not to fight in a war they couldn't win. Sir, said Lisa quietly, I've been studying the Devourer attack patterns in the Council database. There might be something they missed. Nick raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Lisa called up a display showing the path of previous Devourer attacks. Look at this. Every species they encountered tried to run or tried to fight them in open space. But the Devourers have a weakness during their feeding phase. When they're consuming a planet, they lower their shields and focus all their energy on absorption. How does that help us? Asked Commander Johnson. We can't exactly let them eat Earth and then attack them. Actually, Lisa said slowly, we could. If we evacuated most of the population but left a small force behind, we could use Earth itself as bait. When they start feeding, we hit them with everything we have. The other captains on the screen looked shocked. Captain Mitchell shook his head. Lisa, that's suicide. We'd be outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1. Every plan is suicide, Lisa replied. But this might actually work. The problem is we'd have to sacrifice our entire fleet, and anyone who stayed behind probably wouldn't survive. President Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. In the background, Nick could hear advisors arguing about evacuation logistics. Finally, she spoke. I need to know right now how many of you would be willing to stay and fight. One by one, every captain on the screen raised their hand. Nick felt a strange calm come over him as he raised his own. These weren't soldiers, but they were human. When faced with an impossible choice, they chose to protect their home rather than abandon it. Mr. President, said General Thompson, I have to advise against this. The evacuation ships will be here in 18 hours. We could save everyone. Everyone except our world, said Captain Mitchell. Alex, I have kids on Earth. I joined the Space Service to give them a better future. What kind of future do they have as refugees on alien worlds? President Rodriguez nodded slowly. Dr. Carter, how long would you need to prepare this attack? Lisa was already working on her computer. Give me 12 hours to run the calculations and modify our weapons. Pete, can you convert civilian ships into kinetic missiles? Commander Johnson was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. I can rig the cargo haulers and passenger ships to run on autopilot. They won't be coming back, but they'll hit hard. Ma'am, said Nick, we should let people choose. Anyone who wants to evacuate should go. This has to be voluntary. Agreed, said the President. We'll make the announcement in 1 hour. Anyone who wants to leave can board the Council evacuation ships. Anyone who wants to stay and fight can join the fleet. The screen went dark and Nick was alone with his crew again. Lisa was already deep into her calculations. Pete was making notes about ship modifications. The rest of the bridge crew worked quietly, but Nick could see the determination in their faces. Captain, said his communications officer, we're getting messages from all over Earth. People want to know what's happening. Tell them the truth, Nick said. Tell them we have a choice to make. 3 hours later, Nick stood in the shuttle bay watching the evacuation ships arrive. They were enormous vessels that could hold millions of people. But as he watched, he was amazed by what he saw. Less than half the population chose to leave. Families stayed together. Scientists stayed to help with the defense. Engineers stayed to modify the ships. Even children too young to fight stayed because their parents wouldn't abandon Earth. Amy Foster's mother, Colonel Mary Foster, walked up to Nick. She was carrying a duffel bag and wearing a flight suit. Sir, requesting permission to join the Endeavour crew. Colonel, you have 2 daughters. You should evacuate with them. Mary shook her head. Amy is 18 and old enough to make her own choice. She's staying too. And little Jenny is going with my sister on the evacuation ships. Someone needs to be here to make sure she has a world to come back to. Nick looked out at Earth one more time. In 18 hours, the Devourer fleet would arrive. Humanity would either prove that some things were worth fighting for, or they would prove that courage wasn't enough. But they would face the end as humans, not as refugees. Admiral Kate Henderson stood in the command center on Earth's moon, watching the Devourer fleet approach. She had been promoted from captain just 12 hours ago, when the previous admiral chose to evacuate with his family. Now she was in charge of humanity's last stand. The fleet approaching them was unlike anything humans had ever seen. Massive ships that looked like mechanical spiders stretched across space. Each one was the size of a city, and their hulls were covered in strange, organic-looking armor. Behind them came smaller ships by the thousands, moving in perfect formation like a swarm of deadly insects. Admiral, said Tony Richards from his engineering station. Tony was young, maybe 25, but he was the best engineer humanity had. All ships report ready for Operation Longshot, Kate nodded. Operation Longshot was their desperate plan to stop the Devourers. Every civilian ship that couldn't evacuate people had been converted into a weapon. Cargo haulers were now kinetic missiles. Passenger liners carried nuclear bombs. Even small personal shuttles had been rigged with explosives. "Ma'am," said Colonel Sam Brooks, the tactical officer. He was a thin man with nervous eyes, but his mind worked faster than any computer. "The Galactic Council observers are requesting an update on our defensive plan." Kate looked at the screen showing representatives from dozens of alien species. They were watching from their safe ships far away, expecting to record humanity's destruction for their history books. Most of them looked sad. A few looked excited, like they were watching entertainment. "Tell them we're proceeding as planned," Kate said. "Admiral," said the representative of the aquatic depth dwellers, "our sensors show you have positioned most of your fleet directly in the path of the Devourers. This appears to be a tactical error." Kate almost smiled. "It's not an error. But surely you don't intend to engage them in direct combat?" asked the insect-like representative of the Hive Collective. "Every species that has tried direct engagement has been completely destroyed." "We're not every species," Kate said simply. The truth was, Kate was terrified. She had 3 children who were on the evacuation ships heading for safety on alien worlds. Her husband had stayed to fight alongside her, but she might never see any of them again. Still, when she looked at Earth hanging in space below them, she knew they were doing the right thing. "Admiral," said Tony, "Captain Mitchell reports the Discovery is in position near Jupiter. All civilian vessels are ready for their attack runs." Kate opened a channel to all human ships. "This is Admiral Henderson to all vessels. In 30 minutes the Devourers will begin feeding on Mars. When they do, their shields will drop and they'll be vulnerable for exactly 6 minutes. That's our window." Captain Roy Mitchell's voice came through the speakers. "Admiral, my ship is loaded with every nuclear weapon we could fit. We'll make our run count." "Roy," Kate said quietly, "you know this is a one-way trip." "I know, Kate. Tell my wife I love her. Tell her we did this so she could come home someday." Kate wiped her eyes and turned back to her tactical display. The Devourers were spreading out across the solar system. Some headed for Earth, but the largest group was moving toward Mars. Dr. Lisa Carter had been right. They fed on planets in a specific order, starting with the ones that had the most metal in their cores. "Dr. Walsh," Kate said to the scientist at the monitoring station. Dr. Nina Walsh was Lisa's assistant, and she had helped design their attack plan. "Are you reading the Devourer energy patterns?" "Yes, Admiral. Just like we predicted. When they begin feeding, they channel all their power into their absorption beams. Their defensive systems go offline for exactly 6 minutes and 18 seconds. Kate looked at the countdown clock. 28 minutes until the Devourers reached Mars. 28 minutes until they would learn if humans were brave enough or stupid enough to pull off the impossible. "Admiral," said Colonel Brooks, "we're getting communications from the Galactic Council. Several species are offering to take our remaining population if we surrender now." "Tell them thank you, but no," Kate said. "We're committed." The next 20 minutes passed like hours. Kate watched as the massive Devourer ships positioned themselves around Mars. The smaller ships formed a protective screen, while the large ones extended long tentacle-like appendages toward the planet's surface. "Beginning feeding process," reported Dr. Walsh. "Energy levels are dropping across the Devourer fleet. Shields are at 50% and falling." Kate opened the channel to all ships. "All vessels prepare for attack run. Remember, we only get one chance at this." "Admiral," said Tony, "I'm reading massive energy discharges from Mars. They're actually eating the planet." Through the main screen, Kate could see Mars beginning to change. The red planet was getting smaller as the Devourers absorbed its mass and energy. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Shields are down," reported Dr. Walsh. "All Devourer vessels are vulnerable." "Attack! Attack! Attack!" Kate shouted into her communicator. From hidden positions throughout the solar system, human ships began their desperate charge. Captain Mitchell led the way in the Discovery, racing straight toward the largest Devourer ship. Behind him came converted cargo ships, passenger liners, and even small personal craft piloted by volunteers. The Galactic Council observers watched in shock as humanity's tiny fleet threw itself directly at the mechanical monsters. It should have been suicide. It should have been over in seconds, but the humans had done something no other species had ever tried. Instead of fighting the Devourers at full strength, They had waited for the exact moment when their enemies were weakest. Direct hit on the lead devourer, reported Colonel Brooks. Captain Mitchell's nuclear payload has breached their hull. Kate watched as explosions rippled across the massive enemy ship. But there were dozens more, and humanity's fleet was tiny in comparison. "Admiral," said Tony, "we're losing ships fast. The devourers are trying to raise their shields, but our kinetic missiles are hitting them before they can power up." "Dr. Walsh, how much time do we have left?" 3 minutes and 40 seconds until their shields come back online." Kate made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "All remaining ships focus on the central command vessel. Ignore the others." "Ma'am," said Colonel Brooks, "that means sacrificing the outer attack groups." "I know," Kate said quietly. "Do it." She watched as human ships died by the dozens, ramming into devourer vessels or exploding in brilliant flashes of light. Each explosion represented people she knew, engineers, scientists, explorers who had volunteered to give their lives for Earth, but their sacrifice was working. The largest devourer ship was taking massive damage. Its organic armor was cracking, and strange fluids were leaking into space. 30 seconds until shield restoration, reported Dr. Walsh. That's when Kate did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She turned to Tony and said, "Prepare the moon base for ramming speed." "Admiral, what?" "You heard me. We're going to ram the command ship." "Kate, that's insane," Colonel Brooks protested. "This entire base is home to 10,000 people." 10,000 people who volunteered to stay and fight, Kate corrected. "Tony, can you get the moon's engines to full power?" Tony's fingers flew over his controls. The human moon base was built on massive engines that could move it around the solar system. No one had ever thought of using it as a weapon before. "Engines at maximum," Tony reported. "But Admiral, we'll never survive the impact." "We don't need to survive," Kate said. "We just need to finish this." The moon base, with its 10,000 human defenders, began moving toward the wounded devourer command ship. It was the largest object humans had ever used as a weapon. 15 seconds until impact, reported Dr. Walsh. Kate opened a final channel to any human ships that were still alive. "This is Admiral Henderson. If anyone survives this, tell them we fought as humans. Tell them we died as humans. And tell them Earth is still here because we chose to stand and fight." The moon base, traveling at incredible speed, slammed into the devourer command ship just as its shields came back online. The explosion was visible from Earth, a new star burning in the darkness of space. When the light faded, the entire devourer fleet was drifting dead in space. The mechanical monsters that had terrorized the galaxy for generations were finally defeated, but the cost had been terrible. Of humanity's 20 ships and moon-based defenders, fewer than 1,000 people had survived. Kate Henderson was not among them. In the silence that followed, the Galactic Council observers could only stare in shock at what they had witnessed. For the first time in galactic history, someone had actually defeated the Devourers, and they had done it by being willing to sacrifice everything. Colonel Mary Foster floated in her damaged rescue shuttle, looking at what remained of the human fleet. Around her, pieces of ships and debris from the moon base drifted in space like a graveyard. She had survived the battle, but barely. Her left arm was broken and her helmet had a crack that was slowly getting bigger. "Colonel Foster, this is Rescue Ship Phoenix. We have you on our sensors. Stay calm. We're coming to get you." Mary recognized the voice of Captain Ben Clark, one of the few ship commanders who had survived the battle. His cargo ship had been converted into a hospital vessel after the fighting ended. "Ben, what's our status?" Mary asked through her damaged radio. "Not good, Mary. We lost Admiral Henderson, Captain Mitchell, and most of the fleet commanders. Out of 20,000 people who stayed to fight, we have maybe 800 survivors." Mary closed her eyes. Among the dead was her friend Kate Henderson, who had rammed the moon base into the Devourer command ship. Kate had 3 children waiting on the evacuation ships. Now they were orphans. "What about Earth?" Mary asked. "Still there," Ben said with a tired laugh. "Damaged, but still there. The Devourer feeding beams hit the surface before we stopped them. We lost about 10% of the landmass, but the planet survived." A few hours later, Mary was on board the Phoenix, getting her arm treated by Dr. Kevin Hart. Kevin was young, maybe 30, with nervous hands but a sharp mind. He had been studying the wreckage of Devourer ships, trying to understand their technology. "Colonel," Kevin said as he worked on her arm, "I've never seen anything like their systems. The Devourers were part machine, part living organism. They could adapt and learn from each attack. Could adapt, Mary corrected. They're all dead now. That's just it, Kevin said, looking worried. I don't think these were all of them. The technology suggests they were just one group. There might be more fleets out there in deep space. Mary felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. How many more? I don't know. But based on the data I've found, the Devourers have been around for thousands of years. They've probably built many fleets like this one. Before Mary could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. All survivors, please report to the main cargo bay. We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. Mary and Kevin made their way to the cargo bay where the other survivors had gathered. There were so few of them. These people had saved the galaxy, but at a cost that was almost too high to bear. Captain Clark activated the main screen, and suddenly the bay was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. Mary recognized some of them from the database Earth had received. The insect-like Hive Collective, the energy beings called Luminar, and the ancient tree-like arboreals were all present. In the center of the group stood a being that Mary had never seen before. It was tall and thin with pale blue skin and 4 arms. When it spoke, its voice was like music. I am Elder Counselor Zeph Tall of the Ancient Vanguard, the being said. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I speak to the survivors of humanity's defense of the Sol system. Captain Clark stepped forward. Counselor, we're honored, but we're not exactly in shape for formal ceremonies right now. We understand, Zeph Tall said gently. What your species has done is beyond our ability to honor with ceremonies. You have accomplished something that the galaxy thought was impossible. We stopped one Devourer fleet, Mary said, but we've learned there might be others. A murmur went through the alien representatives. The rock being from the granite world spoke up. Is this true? Are there more Devourers? Dr. Hart stepped forward, still nervous but determined to share what he had learned. The evidence suggests that multiple fleets were built. This was probably just the first one to find inhabited space. The silence that followed was heavy with fear. For generations, the galaxy had lived in terror of one Devourer fleet. The idea that there might be more was almost too frightening to consider. This changes everything, said the representative of the Ethereal Collective. If more Devourers exist, then nowhere is safe. Which brings us to why we are here, said Zeftal. The Council has been debating for days about what to do next. Some species believe humanity should be punished for endangering the galaxy by fighting instead of evacuating. Mary felt anger building in her chest. Punished? We saved everyone. Yes, you did, Zeftal agreed. And others believe that humanity should be given the highest honors the galaxy can offer. But there is a third opinion that is gaining support. The Elder Counselor's forearms moved in what might have been a gesture of respect. Many of us believe that humanity should lead the galaxy's defense against future threats. Captain Clark looked shocked. Lead? Counselor, we're barely surviving. We lost most of our fleet and our best commanders. Exactly, said a new voice. An alien that looked like a walking crystal stepped forward. You were willing to sacrifice everything to protect not just your own world, but the entire galaxy. No other species has ever made such a choice. The representative of the aquatic depth dwellers spoke through its water-filled helmet. When we faced the Devourers, we ran. When the Hive Collective faced them, they hid. When every species in this council faced them, we chose survival over victory. Only humans chose to fight, added the tree-like arboreal representative. Only humans were willing to pay the price for everyone's freedom. Mary looked around at the other survivors. They were tired, injured, and grieving for their lost friends. The idea of leading the galaxy seemed impossible. Counselor, she said, we appreciate the honor, but humanity needs time to heal. We need to rebuild our fleet and mourn our dead. Of course, Zeftal said. But while you heal, we must prepare for what comes next. Dr. Hart's analysis suggests that more Devourer fleets will arrive eventually. When they do, the galaxy will need leaders who understand the cost of victory. A young human voice spoke up from the back of the group. What exactly are you asking us to do? Mary turned to see Amy Foster, her own 18-year-old daughter. Amy had insisted on staying to fight and had survived by working in the communication center during the battle. We are asking humans to take the head seat of the Galactic Council, Zeftal explained, to become the coordinators of galactic defense, to make the decisions that other species cannot make. You want us to be in charge of choosing who lives and who dies, Amy said quietly. We want you to be in charge of making sure that as many people as possible get to live, the elder counselor corrected. Your species has proven that sometimes the only way to save everyone is to risk everything. Captain Clark was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, what would this mean for humanity? It would mean responsibility, Zeftal said. It would mean that when the hard choices have to be made, humans would make them. It would mean that the galaxy would look to you for leadership in times of crisis. Mary thought about Admiral Henderson, who had given her life to stop the Devourers. She thought about Captain Mitchell, who had piloted his ship into the enemy knowing he would die. She thought about all the people who had chosen to stay and fight instead of running to safety. It's not really about honor, is it? Mary said. It's about burden. Yes, Zeftal said simply. The galaxy needs someone willing to carry the weight of impossible decisions. Based on what we have seen, humans are the only species willing to do that. Mary looked at her daughter Amy, who would grow up in a galaxy where humans were expected to lead. It was a heavy responsibility for any species, especially one that had almost destroyed itself saving everyone else. We'll need help, Mary said finally. We'll need other species to support our decisions even when they're difficult. You will have that support, promised the representative of the warrior culture Blade Clan. Any species that fights as bravely as humans deserves to lead. Then we accept, Captain Clark said. But we do this as servants of the galaxy, not as its rulers. Zeftal's pale blue face showed what might have been a smile. That attitude is exactly why you are the right choice. As the transmission ended, Mary looked around at the other survivors. They had won a great victory, but the cost had been enormous. Now they were being asked to take on an even greater responsibility. Amy walked over to her mother. Mom, are we doing the right thing? Mary put her good arm around her daughter. I don't know, sweetheart. But I know that someone has to be willing to make the hard choices. And if it's going to be anyone, I'm glad it's us. Jake Morrison finished his story and looked around the council chamber. The silence was complete. Even the constant humming of the station system seemed to have stopped. Every being in the room was staring at him with a mixture of awe and understanding. Crixva, the young Zeltharian who had asked the original question, was the first to speak. The spots on the creature's purple skin had turned a deep gold color, which Jake knew meant respect. Ambassador Morrison, Crixva said softly, I had no idea. The history records mention the defeat of the Devourers, but they do not tell the full story. Most species don't like to remember how close we came to losing everything, Jake said. He walked back to the crystal chair but didn't sit down. They also don't like to remember that they weren't willing to fight for their own survival. A being made of living rock from the granite world spoke up. You make it sound as if we were cowards. Not cowards, Jake corrected. Practical, logical, smart even. Every species in the galaxy made the reasonable choice when faced with the Devourers. Every species except humans. Amy Foster, who had been sitting quietly behind Jake, leaned forward. She was now in her 30s with the same sharp green eyes she'd had as a teenager, but there were lines around those eyes that came from carrying heavy responsibilities. The question isn't whether other species were cowards, Amy said. The question is whether anyone else would have been willing to pay the price we paid. Before anyone could answer, the chamber's emergency communication system activated. A red light began flashing and warning tones echoed through the crystal dome. Communications Officer Rachel Taylor rushed into the chamber. She was young, maybe 25, with short black hair and a face tight with worry. Ambassador Morrison, Rachel said urgently, long-range sensors have detected multiple contacts approaching from deep space. They're big, sir. Really big? Jake felt his blood turn cold.
How big?
Bigger than the original Devourer fleet, sir. And there are 3 separate groups coming from different directions. The alien representatives in the chamber began talking all at once. Some were afraid, others confused, and a few seemed angry. The insect-like hive collective clicked their mandibles rapidly, which was how they showed extreme stress. Silence, Jake called out, and his voice carried the authority that came from 50 years of making impossible decisions. The room went quiet immediately. Rachel, show us what we're dealing with. The young officer activated the chamber's main display. Suddenly, the entire dome was filled with a 3-dimensional map of local space. 3 massive fleets were approaching the galaxy from different angles. Each fleet was easily twice the size of the one humanity had fought 50 years ago. "Dear creators," whispered the representative of the ethereal collective. "There are so many of them." Jake studied the display carefully. His mind was already working on the problem, just like Admiral Henderson and Captain Mitchell had done decades ago. But this time the challenge was much bigger. "How long do we have?" he asked Rachel. 6 months until the first fleet arrives, sir. Maybe 7 for the other 2. Admiral Ben Clark stepped forward from the back of the chamber. He was older now, with gray hair and a weathered face, but his eyes were still sharp. Ben had been one of the few survivors of the original battle, and he had spent the last 50 years helping to build humanity's new fleet. "Jake," Ben said quietly, "this isn't like last time. We can't use the same tactics. There are too many of them, and they're spread out across 3 different approach vectors." "I know," Jake said, "but we have something we didn't have 50 years ago." "What's that?" asked Krixva. Jake looked around the chamber at all the different species represented there. "We have all of you." The young Zeltharian spots turned bright orange with confusion. "But Ambassador, most of our species have never fought in a real war. We don't have the experience that humans do." "Experience isn't what we need," Jake said. "What we need is the willingness to fight together." He walked to the center of the chamber again, just as he had when he started his story. 50 years ago, humanity faced the Devourers alone. We were willing to sacrifice everything because we had no choice. But this time we do have a choice. "What choice?" asked the representative of the aquatic depth dwellers. "We can run like we did before," Jake said. "The galaxy is big enough that some of us might escape. We could scatter to different regions and hope the Devourers don't find us all." A murmur of agreement went through parts of the crowd. Running was still the logical choice. "Or," Jake continued, "we can do what humans did 50 years ago. We can stand and fight, but this time we do it together." The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species were clearly interested. Others were afraid, and a few seemed angry at the suggestion. The representative of the ancient cosmic observers spoke for the first time. Its voice was like wind through empty space. "Ambassador Morrison, you ask us to risk everything our civilizations have built over millions of years. I'm asking you to fight for everything your civilizations have built over millions of years," Jake corrected. "The Devourers won't stop with one galaxy. Dr. Hart's research has shown that they've been consuming worlds for eons. If we don't stop them here, they'll just move on to the next galaxy and the next." Amy stood up from her seat. "My mother fought in the original battle. She survived, but she never stopped carrying the weight of what happened. Every day she wondered if there was another way. But you know what she told me before she died?" The chamber waited for her answer. "She said that the hardest choice isn't deciding whether to fight or run. The hardest choice is deciding what you're willing to sacrifice to protect the people you love." Krixva raised a tentacle. "But how do we fight them?" "My people are explorers and scientists. We have no military fleet." "Neither did we 50 years ago," Jake said. "We converted civilian ships into weapons. We turned cargo haulers into missiles and research vessels into bombs. What matters isn't what kind of ships you have. What matters is whether you're willing to use them." Dr. Kevin Hart, now an old man with white hair, stepped forward from the human delegation. "I've spent 50 years studying Devourer technology. I believe I know how to modify different species' ships to be effective against them. And I've spent 50 years learning how different species think and fight," added Admiral Clark. "We can coordinate a defense that uses everyone's strengths." The representative of the warrior culture Blade Clan stood up. They were a proud species that looked like armored reptiles. "The Blade Clan will fight. We have always been warriors. The Hive Collective will contribute our ships," clicked the insect-like representative. "Our coordination abilities could be useful in battle." One by one, other species began to volunteer. The energy beings called Luminar offered to provide power for weapon systems. The tree-like arboreals said they could grow organic armor for ships. Even the peaceful aquatic depth dwellers offered to help with supply and logistics, but not everyone was ready to fight. "This is madness," said the representative of the ethereal collective. "We should evacuate to the far edge of the galaxy and rebuild there." Jake looked at the being made of glowing fog. "And when the Devourers follow us there? When they consume this galaxy and come looking for more? What then?" "We'll face that problem when it comes." "No," Jake said firmly. "We'll face this problem now while we still have the strength to fight." He turned to address the entire chamber. "I know what I'm asking of you. I know it seems impossible. But 50 years ago, a few thousand humans proved that impossible doesn't mean unwinnable. Rachel stepped forward again. Sir, we're receiving communications from Earth and the human colonies. They want to know our response to the threat. Jake looked at Amy, who nodded. Then he looked at Admiral Clark, who saluted. Finally, he looked around the chamber at all the alien faces staring back at him. Tell them, Jake said, that the Galactic Council chooses to stand and fight. He sat down in the crystal chair for the first time since his story began. The weight of it seemed heavier than before, but he carried it anyway. Krixva, he said to the young Zeltharian, you asked why humans sit in this chair. It's not because we're the strongest or the smartest or the oldest. It's because when everyone else sees an impossible choice, we see a necessary one. Krixva's spots turned silver, which meant deep thought. And now you ask us to make that same choice. I'm asking you to help us make it, Jake corrected. The galaxy is stronger together than any one species could be alone, but only if we're willing to fight together. The young alien looked around the chamber at all the different species. Then it looked back at Jake. Ambassador Morrison, the Zeltharian system pledges our full support to the galactic defense. We may not be warriors, but we are part of this galaxy, and we will not abandon it without a fight. As alarms continued to sound throughout the crystal dome, Jake Morrison sat in the chair reserved for humans and began the hardest job in the galaxy, turning a collection of different species into a unified force capable of fighting the impossible. Outside the station, stars continued to shine in the darkness, but somewhere in that darkness 3 devourer fleets were approaching. The galaxy's greatest test was still to come, but for the first time in 50 years they would not face it alone.